the 1300s, Margaret I of Denmark swiftly transitioned from simply a queen consort to the reigning monarch of not just Denmark, but also Norway and eventually Sweden. This led to the formal establishment of the Kalmar Union in 1397, aimed at enhancing Scandinavian influence and power against rivals like the Hanseatic League, under the premise of equal partnership among the three kingdoms. The union's integrity was, however, undermined by following Danish monarchs who failed to maintain balance, leading to tensions particularly in Sweden. Eric of Pomerania, Margaret's successor, sought to strengthen the union by centralizing power, but his reforms were too abrupt, especially for the politically robust Swedish nobility, leading to prolonged conflicts. The situation worsened with wars with the Hanseatic League that benefited Denmark at the expense of Swedish trade. This cycle of rebellion and suppression continued until the Stockholm bloodbath, where the execution of Swedish nobles triggered a final rebellion, culminating in the election of Gustav Vasa as the Swedish king in 1523, effectively dissolving the Kalmar Union. But how could all of this have been avoided? Pretty straightforward in my opinion. The Danish monarchs respect the Swedish nobility, even try to placate them. Wanting to centralize power so quickly under Eric of Pomerania's rule was understandable, and something royals usually did, but it was just not feasible with how strong the Swedish nobility was. The Swedish nobility is respected and treated as equal to the Danish nobility. Together they form a collective Scandinavian nobility going forward. Because of this, the Hanseatic League is also dealt with in a very different manner. There wouldn't be the same direct conflicts with them early on, as it would hurt Swedish iron exports. Instead, the Scandinavian kingdoms would start to challenge the Hansa by unifying their trade policies. This concerted effort would lead to the strengthening of Scandinavian merchant guilds, positioning them as formidable competitors to the Hanseatic League over time. By the mid-1400s, the geopolitical landscape mirrors that of actual history, yet Scandinavia internally diverges significantly due to the reign of several talented monarchs. These rulers have forged a unified realm in the north, with robust institutions well equipped to endure the ages. A linguistic shift in the Baltic gradually takes shape as Scandinavian traders start to become more relevant than Low German Hanseatic traders, creating many Scandinavian-speaking pockets in important trade centers. In the real world, Schleswig saw a linguistic shift towards Low German. In this scenario, Holstein sees a linguistic shift towards Danish. Swedish, meanwhile, becomes more prominent in the Baltic, and the Finnish language is replaced by Swedish even more than in real life. A century passes and Scandinavia would relatively peacefully press their claims in Karelia and the Kola Peninsula as Muscovy conquered Novgorod. They would also spread their influence in the Baltic through trade as well as conquest. The rest of Europe, meanwhile, has been developing much like in the real world, with the biggest changes being limited to the Baltic and internally in Scandinavia. So France still centralizes and becomes more prominent. Spain forges a colonial empire, the Habsburgs in Austria become a dominant force in the HRE in Central Europe, and the Ottoman Empire conquers its way to the Carpathians. Yet another century passes, and the borders in Europe shift. The trend towards Scandinavian becoming the language of trade in the Baltic has continued. Europe, meanwhile, is at the brink of continent-wide war, as Protestantism has spread throughout the Holy Roman Empire, threatening Habsburg supremacy. In the real world, these wars of reformation had no decisive victor. But with the unified Scandinavian effort, that changes, and the Protestants win decisively. This allows Scandinavia to expand quite a bit in the Baltic and northern Germany. It also results in a much more powerful France and Netherlands, and a drastic weakening of Austria, as Bohemia gains its independence and returns as a relevant power in the region. With this Protestant victory, there is widespread acceptance of Protestantism within the HRE, as it's no longer suppressed, resulting in it spreading significantly further than in real life. And because of this, many more Protestant princes of the HRE seized church lands, bolstering their power and resources, and starting a gradual process of the various tiny duchies and principalities consolidating into larger states. The HRE also starts to lose its relevance much earlier than in real life, as the much weakened Austria can't maintain its hegemony. With the weakening of the HRE and strengthening of the princes, what was once the chaotic mess that is the HRE has turned into a smaller number of more substantial states. Bavaria in particular stands stronger than ever, as it took advantage of the weakening Austria, having mostly taken its place as southern Germany's powerhouse. Another major theme this past century has been the various great powers of Europe keeping France in check. Following the Wars of Reformation, France became the most powerful force on the European mainland, and was almost poised to conquer much of the former Holy Roman Empire. But coalitions of various European powers, almost always including Britain, managed to prevent France from dominating Germany and the Rhine region. Scandinavia, meanwhile, is currently in a golden age, with almost complete hegemony in the Baltic. It grew significantly as it, along with Russia, Prussia, and Bohemia, carved up large swaths of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which remains but is significantly weakened. Over in the Americas, meanwhile, a lot has been going on during all this. While Spain and Portugal have carved out most of the Americas, North America remains contested. Scandinavia has the colony of Vinland, centered around the Leif Erikson River and Great Lakes. Great Britain, meanwhile, has colonized most of the East Coast, and France Louisiana, with a loose network of trading outposts along the Mississippi River and its tributaries. Tensions have been growing here for decades between settlers. Unlike Vinland and Louisiana, which are more trade-oriented colonies, Britain's colonies on the East Coast are proper settler colonies, filled with colonists eager to move west of the Appalachians. This would eventually lead to war between the three great European powers, which neither side would really win. The Iroquois would be completely dismantled and absorbed into the British-American as well as French-American colonies, allowing for a limited British settlement in Ohio and along Lake Ontario. But France and its network of alliances with various native groups would retain control over most of the Louisiana colony, and Vinland would expand slightly into British-American territory. This war would, however, only be a temporary stopgap for the British-American colonists, as they become more and more relevant in British politics and gradually make their way west with or without the legal rights to do so. By the end of the century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth has been entirely partitioned. Bohemia in particular, with control over some of the wealthiest regions in Europe, got the lion's share of Poland proper. Its control, however, is very fragile. The mostly German elite is not particularly welcomed in Poland, increasing unrest. Among the discontent population, both Poles and Czechs, Republican ideals have also been on the rise, inspired by the semi-democratic institutions of the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as well as the rise of the Republic of Lombardy-Venetia. Just to the north, the short-lived union of Prussia and Brandenburg has ended, after a major war with Scandinavia physically split the two realms and placed a Bavarian prince on the throne of Brandenburg. The discontent in Bohemian Poland, and now too among the Czech peasants, would lead to a full-on republican revolution in Bohemia, toppling the king and German elite and establishing the Republic of Zapadoslavia, meaning West Slavia, which would quickly expand into the majority Slavic parts of Prussia. Afraid of Zapadoslavia's rapid growth and toppling of its monarchy, Scandinavia, Bavaria, Hungary, and Russia would jointly invade the young republic, but not without triggering a larger European conflict. Lombardy-Venetia and the Netherlands, republics themselves, would support Zapadoslavia, and so would France, sensing an opportunity to weaken its rivals, which basically consisted of all other European powers at this point. Suddenly, it wasn't just a war to crush republicanism, but a war to prevent French domination of the continent. The war would last a decade, and by the 1810s it would end in a costly victory for the coalition. The Netherlands would become a monarchy, Zapadoslavia would be crushed and split into Polish and Czech kingdoms, and France would be mostly contained, with the German Confederation, led by Bavaria, being established as a means of keeping France contained in the future. While the European Revolutionary Wars ended mostly in failure for Republican revolutionaries across much of Europe, they would leave their mark. The Republic of Lombardy-Venetia, now the Republic of Italy, would remain due to its impressive military successes and wide support among the local population. And Republican ideals as well as nationalism would spread across the continent, inspiring future movements. With the rise of these ideas, the rest of the 1800s would be tumultuous for Europe. Hungary and the Ottoman Empire had to face several rebellions, leading to new states being carved out in the Balkans. The German Confederation, meanwhile, would turn into a proper kingdom under the Bavarian monarchy, and it would seriously threaten Scandinavian power in the southern Baltic. Russia too would be on the rise, and nominally aligned with Germany with its similar interest in challenging Scandinavian power. This would come to a head in the Great Northern War, where Scandinavia came to the defense of Poland. Here Germany and Russia pushed Scandinavia out of Livonia and Pomerania, although with the help of British mediation and an impressive defensive effort, Scandinavia would retain Holstein and Estonia. This would, however, be the trigger for Scandinavian neutrality going forward, as it would attempt to remain on the peripheral and not interfere in European politics too much. Over in the Americas, states have been moving more and more towards independence. Following the instability caused by the Revolutionary Wars, many Latin American colonies used the opportunity to push for independence. In North America, meanwhile, the United Provinces, or British North America, has been granted more and more sovereignty, officially still being a part of the British Empire, but largely administering its own affairs. The same can be said of Vinland, which enjoys relatively peaceful relations with the United Provinces. Back in Europe, the Ottoman Empire has slowly been collapsing, and tensions have been rising across the continent once again, as complex networks of alliances have been developing. Germany is truly a great power at this point, threatening Scandinavia, France, and the balance of power in Europe. This, along with the loss of Scandinavia as an ally as it pursues neutrality, leads to closer ties between France and the British Empire. Italy, meanwhile, a major maritime power, has been picking away at the Ottoman Empire and has goals of expanding across the Mediterranean. This eventually comes to a head, and the tipping point in this world is also in the Balkans, where a prominent Italian official was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist in Italian Bosnia. As retaliation, Italy invades Serbia, with Germany coming to their aid. But Hungary and Russia both guarantee Serbia's independence. France is in alliance with Hungary, and Britain guarantees the independence of the Netherlands, which Germany needs to invade through if it wants to circumvent the most extensive French defenses. And thus we have another continent-wide war on our hands, the Great War. It would be one of the most devastating conflicts in history. On the Eastern Front, the Russian and Hungarian empires would be completely devastated. But in the West, sides eventually turned in favor of the French and British. This would mark the end of the Age of Empires on the European continent. Germany and Italy would be forced to give up most of their non-German or Italian-speaking lands, apart from those overseas. The crumbling Ottoman Empire, meanwhile, would go on to form the Near East Federation. Colonialism in the rest of the world would, however, continue for most of the 1900s, with colonies only gradually being granted sovereignty. And this is roughly where we are today. In the modern day, we have a world resembling, but far from identical to the real one. There was another major European power, and this had a profound impact. Scandinavia today is still a major European power. Including Russia, it has the 7th largest population in Europe, behind Spain and ahead of Poland. Scandinavia is extremely wealthy. Despite having only slightly over half the population, its GDP is around the same as the UK and France's. Its military is also among the strongest in Europe and the world. It obviously can't compete with continent-spanning behemoths like the United Provinces of America or China, but it is among Europe's strongest. Here are the largest subdivisions of Scandinavia, the crowns of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. These used to be independent kingdoms, but today mean very little administratively. Although not relevant administratively, the crowns of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway do represent historical cultural regions that are somewhat relevant today. The more meaningful subdivisions of Scandinavia, however, are the Länsdele or Lent, which roughly translates to provinces, which can be seen here. One thing you may have noticed is the population of Denmark, particularly Sjælland, Halland, and Skåne, are super inflated, and this is because the demographics of this Scandinavia developed differently. Instead of several economic and cultural centers along the various Scandinavian capitals, there is mainly just one centered around the Øresund and secondarily along the Kattegat coasts, as the capital moved north to Elfsborg. So people settled in this area way more than in the real world, and such a large population in this region was, if it were the central economic and cultural hub of a large colonial power, totally possible. Copenhagen not just being a major capital city of a smaller European country, but rather the most important economic hub in a global empire, also grew drastically more than in real life, becoming a city comparable to Madrid, Paris, or London in size, hence the huge population on Sjælland. Scandinavia would also have had a profound impact on the rest of the world through its colonial ventures. Scandinavian remains the lingua franca in most of its former African colonies, and you'll find a few Scandinavian place names in what used to be the Scandinavian Philippines, East Indies, and India. But only its settler colonies would survive with their Scandinavian heritage properly intact. The most notable Scandinavian settler colony would of course be Vinland. Vinland has a population twice that of its old mother nation, and in many ways mirrors its southern neighbor, the United Provinces, in a way being a smaller Scandinavian-speaking version of it. Finland isn't a global superpower like the United Provinces of America, but is a relevant middling power like Scandinavia, the UK, or Japan. Also notable are New Sjælland, named after Sjælland or Sjælland in Denmark, as well as Christiansland or Christiansland, named after King Christian VII of Scandinavia. But that's about all for now. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Also a big thank you to all my channel members. See you next time.